This video was sponsored by War Thunder. More about them later in the video. In 2005, Monolith Productions, and yes, we're still talking about them, was a busy bee. In just 1 year, they made 3 massive games, with them being The Matrix Online, Fear, and today's topic, Condemned: Criminal Origins. Now, like a lot of Monolith games back then, Condemned was relatively untouched by development issues. Starting life as a game called The Dark, the player took on the role of Agent Cross, who used magic to conduct investigations. And although this concept was developed as far as a fully working demo, the premise didn't stick. Instead, they reworked the game, keeping many of the Dark's elements, all while aiming for a more grounded setting. In this new setting, the player took on the role of an FBI agent hunting down a serial killer in an experience that was styled after movies like Seven, Saw, and The Silence of the Lambs. They wanted it to be realistic, they wanted it to be cinematic, and they got what they wanted. Hello everybody, I'm B4 Brandos and welcome to my retrospective on Condemned: Criminal Origins. And yes, I'm covered in super glue. I thought this stuff would dry faster. It's a little rich for me to call this a retrospective because I didn't really properly play the game until a couple months ago when I did it on stream. And before that, I was just a 14-year-old little scaredy cat who noped out of the game the second that office chair got thrown at me. But after receiving the recommendation to play it from a viewer, I jumped back in and was more than pleasantly surprised. Condemned manages to take my favorite aspects of Fear and dial them all the way up. Pretty much anything I liked about Fear's atmosphere or level design is not only present in this game, but damn near perfected. Now the writing is definitely a little interesting.
Apples.
But all in all, the game really hits the nail on the head of what it was going for. There's points where it somehow feels like you're less playing a video game and are somehow just controlling a thriller movie. It's incredible. But I need to stop praising this game before we actually get into the game, otherwise people are gonna stop watching. So without further ado, let's get Condemned: Criminal Origins. So the game starts with an opening credits sequence, and I usually wouldn't point out something like this, but this opening really sets the mood for the game. Like the whole game, the whole mood, it's right here, it's perfect. Okay, that's enough. The game actually starts with our protagonist Ethan Thomas arriving at a crime scene. Meeting the on-scene detective and following him inside, we find a grisly scene. The matchmaker, a serial killer Thomas has been investigating for some time, has found his newest victim. During this sequence, we're introduced to 2 major elements in the game: the investigation mechanics and Thomas's seemingly psychic link to the killers he chases. Back on the investigation mechanics, these are pretty bare bones. If you come across the clue, the screen will blur and pressing T will make Thomas pull out the correct detection device. This can be a UV light, a spectrometer, or a fluid profiler. Although it doesn't really make a difference because all of these do the same thing. They just let you see stuff that you couldn't see before, except it's got cool colors. Now, like I said, the system is bare bones, but it's still somehow very immersive. The player isn't actually doing any detective work here. They're just doing what our lab tech Rosa tells us to. But the atmosphere is really what makes up for it. At this point, the player knows just as much as Ethan does, and slowly picking up the clues, your mind is trying to put together what happened here. But what did happen here? Well, what we learn is that this was the work of the matchmaker. A mark on the male mannequin's face is consistent with other matchmaker crime scenes, and the victim was strangled to death by someone missing an index finger. That's as far into the investigation as we get though, since the detective that met us here suddenly smells smoke, and heading to the room it's coming from...
He's right above us! Call for backup now.
The killer is still here, and being tasked with heading him off, we journey into the building, running into our first enemy. Fuck you! This is the Addict, one of Criminal Origin's common enemies, but as far as common enemies go in games, the ones in Condemned have always stuck with me, mostly because they're just people. They're not a part of a coordinated force against you, these are troubled people. And honestly, I don't want to give away too much at this point, so I'll talk about them a little bit later. So continuing on through the building, we try to restore power, which results in us being stunned, and while we're down, we have a strange encounter. Following the man, we're introduced to combat, which I also don't want to talk about. Man, this is annoying. Condemned is a jack of all trades, master of many. You know, we're talking about combat, atmosphere, enemies. It's all amazing, and it's all really well showcased in this intro level, but I don't want to mention any of it in passing like I don't have a phone book worth of praise to throw at each element. But hey, if we're going to talk about the intro, I will talk about some of the instant cracks that show up here. One of the first things you'll notice is that Ethan moves like a man who is on the verge of shitting his pants. His base speed is definitely on the slower side of things, and if you come across any kind of slope, just go for a power nap. Seriously, you have time to burn. It is so fucking slow. Oh, he's so slow. It's really funny too, because in the intro, I thought that this one staircase you go up when you're following the detective was only slow as a kind of scripted, realistic, grounded type thing. But no, Ethan legitimately goes up every staircase he finds that slowly. It's a baffling design choice. I don't know why they did it, but it's like they had the perfect game and they're like, guys, this game's gonna be too good. We need to make it slightly shit. Another thing that comes up is some cases of weird writing throughout the game. Like when we run into the detective again in the intro level, he literally gives Ethan a verbal tutorial, like an in-universe tutorial. It feels like he's 2 seconds away from telling Ethan to press F on the keyboard to activate his flashlight.
You can always find an entry tool somewhere around to get you past Barry. You can even use things like an axe or a sledgehammer as a weapon. They do a great deal of damage, but they're slow. Find yourself in a sticky situation, use your taser to temporarily stun your target. If you're close enough, you'll find it a great way to disarm the slug of his weapon. Swinging a lead pipe bust heads faster if that's what you prefer.
Press the resist button repeatedly to regain your strength. When you've had enough, press the surrender button to submit.
Anyway, moving forward, we're ambushed by the man who stole our gun. The cops from before show up and showcase the world's worst reaction time.
Police! Drop the weapon now!
The man then throws Ethan out the window and everything goes black. Now, just before we move on, I want to talk about just how amazing this intro is, because until now, I haven't actually given it enough credit. Now, controversial personal opinion, this is one of the best video game intros ever. For me, it is right up there next to Half-Life 2 and BioShock. And this is completely thanks to how well it condenses the entire game experience into one area. Just by playing the intro, you're given a taste of everything that's to come while giving nothing away. Like for a start, you just have so many questions. Why are these people just ready to kill you? Why are we interested in collecting dead birds? Why is there apparently an uptick in serial killer activity in Metro City?
The patrolman on duty said there was a mannequin involved, just like the matchmaker. Whole damn city's crawling with sick killers.
Questions aside, the atmosphere found in this level is on point. The environments look dirty and old. It feels real. There's no other way to say it. I think what really helps the entire feel of the game is the sound design, because I don't know if I've ever played a game that deploys sound effects and voice acting in such a realistic and visceral way. Not in the way that this game does it. Really, I could get hung up on the sound design for ages, because I think that's what keeps the game feeling up to date. The noises the enemies make don't sound clean. They don't sound like they were cooked up in an audio booth. It sounds like literally someone got into a street fight and recorded the noise. It's so good. Hey buddy, man, that Ethan Thomas guy sure did a number on you. Luckily, now that you're bedridden for the next few weeks and can't do anything absolutely insane, you have time to play the sponsor of today's video, which is War Thunder. War Thunder is a free-to-play vehicle combat-based multiplayer game with over 70 million players worldwide for PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. In it, you can fight with over 2,500 unique vehicles, which range from modern-day tanks and helicopters to 1920s biplanes and ships, all of which are highly detailed from how they play down to how they sound. Authenticity is key in this game, and you won't be let down when it comes to attention to detail with features like vehicle damage. In War Thunder, it's not just about hitting your target, it's about where you hit your target. Each vehicle has a number of essential parts it needs to function, so if you shoot someone's fuel tanks, weapons, engine, or crew, you can expect a realistic outcome. And speaking of realism, it goes a little further with another feature, the damage X-ray, which allows you to see exactly what happened when your or an enemy's vehicle is destroyed. It brings an entirely new aspect to gameplay, allowing you, the player, to figure out how to keep bringing the fight even in the face of failing components. And finally, a feature I personally recommend the game for is its unique gameplay. It's not just a game about tanks or a game about ships, it's a game about all of them, and it accommodates players who enjoy all sorts of different gameplay types. If you like fast-paced action, tanks is the way to go. If you like planning ahead, maritime warfare is for you. And if you like a mix of both, aviation might just be your thing. And the best part is that now is a fantastic time to jump in if you're new to the game or haven't played in at least 6 months, since you can use my sign-up link that I've left in the comments and description to receive a massive bonus pack in-game, which includes stuff like the exclusive Eagle of Valor vehicle decorator, 100,000 silver lions, 7 days of premium account, and much more. But remember, this offer is available for a limited time only, so grab it while you can. He's not listening to me, is he? Anyway, back on the story, Ethan has a weird dream of this monster thingy crawling up his back, and waking up for real, he finds some random guy sitting in his apartment. And Ethan's reaction to this is absolutely what cements this game's kind of level of writing. Like who would react to some dude just sitting in their apartment like this?
Who are you? What is going on?
Excuse me, what the actual fuck are you doing in my house?
So the guy says that his name is Malcolm Van Horn and explains that the FBI found his gun at the crime scene for those 2 cops, making him the prime suspect. And once again, we see the full quality of writing on display because Malcolm encourages Ethan to go on the run and continue his investigation.
The detectives.
They're dead. Shot with your weapon. And you will be blamed for their deaths.
Ridiculous. I'll just tell them.
What? Tell them the truth? They have already decided the truth.
This is insane. I can't just give up the bureau.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
So with the police arriving, Van Horn tells Ethan to head to the metro station, and heading to the window, he sees a glimpse of what looks like the man from earlier in an apartment adjacent from him. With our objective set, Ethan heads out, and I love this level. I'm still not up to talking about the ambience, but just this area and what it shows the player is awesome. The back alley has this cold saturation all through it, and the questions running through a first-time player's head add to the atmosphere. Why were we framed? Who was our attacker? Who is Van Horn? What is going on? I love how all these questions all work off each other. For the player, there is something big and mysterious going on way above their heads, and yet here we are in a cold, dark alleyway with the only objective being to run away. But Condemned doesn't just set up the plot and say see ya till the end of the level. Every moment of gameplay is leading up to a rapidly approaching bubble burst of whatever the player thinks is happening at the current time. In the previous cutscene, we see for a few seconds that someone is watching us from the apartment adjacent to Ethan's. The mystery is set up. Early in this level, we find surveillance photos of Ethan's apartment taken from the angle of our mystery man's hideout. The mystery is expanded. Finally, near the end of the level, when we make it to the apartment, the mystery is blown wide open, fully connecting it to the main plot, and Condemned does this a lot. Things you chase up in the story seem vaguely connected until they reveal their true depths in a moment that only immerses you deeper. And the best part is, it's not even annoying, it's just kind of creepy that the more you dig and unearth about this mystery, the more you realize that there is still just something else just below the surface a little further down. But let me pull myself back here because we haven't actually even reached our mystery man's apartment yet. No, to do that, we need to make our way through the metro station, and to do that, I need to talk about how the player stays alive. Jumping into gameplay, Ethan Thomas is a weird protagonist. He's a tank that doesn't play like a tank but sure as hell moves like one. And while I was a little put off about how the mechanics work in the game at the start, I began to appreciate how well his systems blended not only together but with the general mood of the game. To start, the gameplay of Condemned is separated into two juxtaposed camps, movement and combat. And what makes these two juxtaposed is the speed. Pretty much Ethan is slow. Really slow. Like, this guy can't be threatened by the mafia with being fitted with concrete shoes because he's already rolling with them. During the game, his base movement speed matches that of an old guy in a mall who doesn't really know what he wants to buy. And sprinting? Laughable, man. And if you think that's bad, just add slopes, stairs, or anything that requires Ethan to change his elevation slightly, because you really feel it when you get snagged on one of these things. It's like getting your car stuck in the mud. Oh, this is gonna take forever. So yeah, movement isn't breaking any new ground in traversal systems unless you consider going backwards to be an evolution. But on the other side of the fence is the combat, and this is where the game pulls a complete 180. It's no secret that combat is what Condemned is well known for. It's the game where your weapon is whatever you can rip off the wall. Pretty much it goes like this. You choose your weapon, a pipe on the wall, a 2x4 plank of wood, a sign. All of these options have their pros and cons in terms of speed, damage, and blocking ability. Personally, I found that there weren't a whole lot of times when it mattered what I went into a fight with because the combat isn't really hinged on the weapon, but instead the abilities of the player wielding it. And sometimes this is a lesson taught to the player the hard way, since some weapons also double as tools you need to navigate through the world. Sledgehammers can break padlocks, fire axes can break down doors, and shovels can disable security gates. It really pays to learn the inner systems of combat, which isn't hard because overall combat is simple. You have a kick, a basic attack, a block, and it is the perfect system. Often fights you get into aren't about speed, they're about anticipation and reaction. Thanks to the amazing enemy animations, fights are not easily predictable. The junkies are twitchy, they'll sometimes do a quick jab at you, fake a swing, or even if you hit them, catch you off guard with a blind counterattack. At the starts, the fights can feel chaotic due to the massive range some enemy attacks have, as well as the sheer number of unpredictable attack and counterattack animations, but over time you begin to see patterns form and you can anticipate what's coming next. It turns fights into a kind of dance. It's not about beating down on the other guy till he stops moving, it's about matching their frenzied fighting style with a measured counter and attack play style. Once you get the whole thing down pat, it just becomes really satisfying to get into. You begin wanting to get into fights. Another cool thing is that if you damage an enemy enough, you have the chance to do a finishing move, which you can choose out of 4 options, which is a punch, a ground slam, a neck snap, or a headbutt. Personally, I love this system because it doesn't really do anything. The player doesn't get anything for doing these executions, but it lets the player choose to end the fight on a certain tone. For me, if it was a good fight that I felt I did well in, then the enemy earned a punch for a dance well done. But if the enemy was a pain in the ass that took most of my health away, then it got the neck snap. I just think it's really cool that if the player plays how they're meant to, staying calm and collective, the game gives them the option to act actually express some unopposed violence and really let loose. I think it even works on a story level. Ethan is constantly getting into fights he didn't ask for, constantly under attack, constantly on the defense, just like the player. But at the end of the fight, Ethan gets the chance to really take out some rage on the guy. But it's not all about up close and personal. Through the game you can find guns, which I'm not going to talk about right now in the interest of not slowing down the pace of the video, but another ranged weapon Ethan has access to is the Tazer.
Use your taser to temporarily stun your target.
And oh boy, this is a tricky subject. So the Taser, in my opinion, is a great and horrible addition to the game. In a fight, if you need an enemy to take a chill pill, you can press the middle mouse button and Ethan will whip out the Taser, giving your overeager friend a pretty lengthy stay in Stun Town. During this time, you can literally steal weapons out of enemies' hands, run away, or more often than not, land a killing blow. And this is where it kind of hits me in a strange place. The Taser recharges, and the reason this is a bad thing is that in this game of melee scrapping and quick reaction times, you have this regenerating, instant stopping power, ranged attack that you can just use at any point, and it will stop any enemy in the game. Like, if I'm being honest, it kind of ruins the pacing of the fights. You'll never be down to the last guy hoping you don't miss a single block or you're done, because you can just pull an Indiana Jones and press the I win button. It's a strange addition that they do fix in the sequel, but it's just this weird hiccup in the flow of combat that makes an otherwise solid system feel slightly clunky. Now, I know we still haven't talked about guns, but that was the general gist of the moment-to-moment gameplay, and I have to say, pretty solid. The gameplay overall is slow burn on purpose so that you have time to soak in the environment, an environment that somehow makes a combat situation suddenly popping up feel natural. Anyway, back in the story, we finally make our way through the metro station. Malcolm calls us to explain what's going on without actually explaining what's going on.
I know many things about you, Ethan. Since your father's death, I've watched you, hoping that you would find your potential.
What do you mean by that?
And we finally make it to the apartment opposite of our own. In the different rooms, we can find that this has been some sort of long-term residence for someone. And finding a wall littered with newspaper clippings, Rosa, who's willing to help Ethan clear his name, realizes that all of these clippings are of serial killer cases Ethan has personally worked. Someone is interested in Ethan, and this is made more clear when we find the room where the photos we found were taken. On a nearby desk, there's a tape recorder where we can hear a phone call between Ethan and his boss. It's clear that Ethan hasn't been doing too well.
We've got to get a break in this case soon. There's been some bad luck. All of it yours, Thomas.
Suddenly we're attacked by strange shadow creatures, and fighting them off, we see the man from the matchmaker crime scene who then runs away. Now in the metro station, things start to unravel for Ethan. Compared to later in the game, he does have all of his marbles here, but this is where the first cracks start forming, which turns the atmosphere of Condemned from great to masterful. By the way, that hallucination of the birds coming through the window might seem random, but remember, in this game, dead birds are a collectible. So just keep that in mind for later, it's lore related. But back to the atmosphere, I love every single level in Condemned. They all have this disgusting unique vibe to them, but the metro station is one of my favorites, just due to it being the start of Ethan's descent into some kind of contained insanity. In the metro station, you can feel what Ethan is thinking. This guy has been watching me, I'm connected to this, and because of that, I'm on the run from my colleagues. What am I doing? Why is everyone trying to kill me? With all this running through Ethan's mind, the stress must be really piling up for him now. And you can really see this with standout moments like this one. Seeing this enemy run into view and disappear gives you a window into Ethan's mind. This guy is in survival mode, so much so that he's hallucinating enemies around every corner. It's stuff like this that makes Condemned so special. It's that character insight, even in moments where there's no dialogue. It's a blend of storytelling within gameplay that video games are so great for, and Condemned manages to perfectly execute it. Like, I'm genuinely in awe of how well they pull this off. This game is so good! The atmosphere also works so well in Condemned because their locations feel real. For all the complaining I did about how slow Ethan's slowness is, it's that crawling pace that lets the level environments feel like real places. In any other video game, if you're in a subway station, this subway station has to be the biggest one on Earth. Just because if it was life-size, the guy like Point Man would blow through it in 2 seconds, and every AAA game would be about an hour long. In the case of Condemned, this subway station feels real. You go down a ramp, some escalators, and bang, you're on the platform. There's no pointless rooms. It's like they rebuilt a real train station in-engine, and that's what makes it all feel so damn real. Quick detour, isn't it weird how like every game in modern day boasts realism by saying we got some pixel enhancing technology when immersion doesn't really come from that. Immersion comes from having a seamless experience, getting pulled from your current world into the game world. To do this, you need to have environment appropriate sound effects, lighting, and world geometry. Pull the sum of these parts off correctly and you have a living, breathing world. Condemned nearly 20 years later, 20 fucking years, still feels real because Monolith paid attention to detail. The sound effects are on point, the lighting is on point, and the levels match up with everything above. It's got an identity that it sticks to, which makes it feel like the real deal. Who cares that all the characters look like they're made of Play-Doh? There's just something there that masks everything that's old in a layer of unity that you can't help but be sucked into and immersed in. So have I mentioned this game's good? I think a lot of game studios could learn from what Monolith did with Condemned. It's not about graphics, it's about a strong, united design direction. Anyway, rant over. Back in the metro, we eventually catch up with our mystery man, who boards a train, and jumping on the back, we begin the most awkward train ride ever because for some reason the train noise doesn't play on the PC version anymore. But Mystery Man shows up and knocks us off the back of the train, forcing us to move into a kind of weird sewer/maintenance tunnel system. And this is another area that I love, not because of the atmosphere, but because of the enemies that show up in it. These are the rejects, and we'll get onto them in a second, but first, let's talk about enemies as a whole in this game. In many games, the player is usually fighting against a unified force, and that's normally the case because all these enemies need to all want to kill the player, not each other. In Condemned, the enemy force is so unique that it actually rolls into the story and adds to the mystery. Why are all these people just ready to kill? Well, the easy answer would be drugs, but in this game, it's never explicitly stated what exactly is making all these people go crazy, and that's something I really like about the game. Now, usually in these videos, when I get to the point when I talk about one enemy, I usually just go and do an enemy section of the video and talk about all of them, but here in this game, all of these enemies are kind of unique to their own environments, and pretty much every level a new enemy is introduced into the fray. So going forwards, I'll just talk about the enemy of the area for every section, as well as some theories on who they were before they just went crazy. But first, let's go through some enemies we've already met. The most common enemy in the game are the addicts, which come in a few variations. It's kind of like on the level of replicas from Fear, like how they all have different models and they do slightly different things, but It's not really interesting. What I do find interesting, however, is the name. This type of enemy is specifically referred to as the addicts, which is our tip-off that whatever is sweeping this city isn't drugs. You can see this because of the different classes of people in this enemy type. You have people who look like they're homeless, and then you have those who look like they've just been in a motorcycle crash and ran away from the scene. It's clear that at least some of these people were functioning addicts before any of this started, and something has just pushed them over the edge. This is something I love about the enemies in the game, by the way. With the official guide, we're not given actual lore on the enemies, we're only given names, and yet going off their clothes, we can piece together who they are meant to be, who they used to be, and it's really cool. As well as that, there's a pretty big piece of the puzzle lying in their name, and I'm not talking about just enemy names specifically, I'm talking about the enemy faction that you just fight through the game. They are called the Influenced. Remember that for later. In the Rejects case, this one is a little more sad. This enemy type is clearly younger than the other enemies, and if I were to guess, I'd say young adult. In the area you're introduced to them, you can find that they have built a shelter for themselves in this sewer/storm drain. To me, it seems like these were young people who just couldn't make it. Something was affecting them. This could have led to them losing their jobs and not being able to make it on the streets. They retreated into the sewers. I mean, just by looking at them, their flesh is rotting. It looks like they haven't eaten in a week. To me, these guys really capture what's so awesome about the enemies in Condemned. They're not monsters, they're not part of some faction hell-bent on opposing the player. They're just people who have hit rock bottom and then had their faces rubbed in it. In this same level, we also run into a new enemy called the Sandhog. These guys act as a tankier enemy to oppose the player, but on the lore side, it looks like these guys might actually be ex-firefighters. In many levels, they're always seen wearing fire gear, and if I were to guess, I'd wager they're out-of-the-job firemen, victims of layoffs due to a severely underfunded fire department. Oh, and don't worry, I know I keep hinting that the city is a shithole, but I will talk about it in depth soon. Maybe a bit later, but in this video, I swear. So after this, nothing really happens for the rest of the level. We fight a couple of enemies, and at some point, Ethan decides to give up chasing the mystery man in favor of investigating a train car. Heading inside, we end up pulling some forensics and find that this is a sort of forward operating base for the matchmaker. Remember that the matchmaker poses male mannequins with his female victims, and this train car is loaded with mannequin parts. So doing some forensics, we figure out where the mannequins came from, and boarding a train, the level comes to an end. And before we go into this next cutscene, there's something I want to talk about, and that's the not great writing. Now, Fear and Condemned were written by completely different people, but they do share the Monolith Productions trend of being able to cook up one hell of a mystery. But the issue is that while they have great setup, the more you dive into these mysteries and kind of explain the ins and outs, the less well constructed it seems, and the worse off the whole game feels. Take this next cutscene, for example, where Ethan gets on the train and he gets a call from his boss. Like, I think at this exact point in the game, my ability to take it seriously took a massive hit. I mean, just watch it. I'm gonna play the full thing because I have something to say about pretty much every line here.
Yeah.
Thomas, it's Farrell. Running from the Bureau will do no good. You know we'll find you eventually. Look, I understand. The caseload became too much. You weren't solving cases like you used to. You're talented, high-strung. You snapped. It happens sometimes.
Look, I did not snap. Someone else killed those policemen. It looks like it might have been the matchmaker.
With your gun? That seems unlikely, doesn't it? We have psychiatric staff that can help you sort things out.
With all due respect, I don't need a shrink.
Okay, so let me get this straight. Director Farrell here, without even asking Ethan what's going on, jumps to the conclusion that Ethan has snapped and murdered 2 cops because he wasn't solving cases like he used to. Ethan then does the logical thing and explains what really happened, but the director doesn't want to hear it, and then implies that Ethan won't even go to jail by saying that the Bureau has psychiatric staff to help him. Ethan then says he doesn't need a shrink and promptly hallucinates. Yeah, I just have a few bones to pick with this scene. To start, Ethan, this is your chance to tell your side of the story, and yet all you say is one sentence.
Look, I did not snap. Someone else killed those policemen. It looks like it might have been the matchmaker.
How about a little more clarity? I get it's not engaging as a story if Ethan were to say, my gun was taken by a guy who was hiding at the crime scene and then I followed him and he attacked me, pinned me to a wall and shot the 2 police officers. He then threw me out the window and I woke up in my apartment with a guy named Malcolm Van Torn who told me that you guys had decided I was guilty. What else could I have done, Farrell? Like, I know that he can't just say that, but come on, say a little more. Also, why is the Bureau so blatantly stupid in this universe? We play as a forensics guy who literally has a big bag of toys that can remotely detect and sample all kinds of substances. Why wasn't any forensic work done to determine that the shooter probably wasn't Ethan's height? Why wasn't it taken into account that a call was put in by the police stating that there was still a suspect in the building? Wasn't there any work done to look at the room as a whole? Wouldn't there be signs of 2 sets of boot prints on the flooring that indicated a fight? Wouldn't it be considered weird that Ethan apparently decided to throw away his gun and jump headfirst through a boarded up window and plummet 3 stories to escape instead of just leaving normally? I don't know why, but the Bureau in this game is just so eager to incriminate their agents rather than actually investigate shit. Oh, and if you thought that them jumping to conclusions is a sign of some FBI conspiracy, without going into too much detail, the answer is kinda yeah, but nah. What we learn later in the series actually makes them seem even more incompetent in this game with how they handle Ethan's whole situation. Anyway, we're getting off track here. So arriving at the mall where the mannequin parts came from, the game takes on a whole new atmosphere. According to Rosa, the part of town we're in is truly the wrong side of the tracks. The store for me is an amazing showcase of how bad things in the city are getting. You can see that the place is meant to be grand, lit up. You can even see Christmas decorations adorning the walls. This mall has been out of commission for a while. The corruption that has slowly been taking over Metro City has completely consumed this place. It almost feels haunted, but this could be chalked up to Ethan's deteriorating mental state. A new enemy is also introduced here in the form of the mannequin, and these guys are some of my favorites in the game. They pretend to be mannequins by literally having the shells of mannequins plastered onto their skin. Initially, they just pose on their platforms until noticing you, and jumping off, they just stalk towards you in this really unsettling stride. Now, there's not a whole lot that's really special about these guys. They fight like normal influenced, and the only real special thing about them is the way they look. But personally, the thing I find most interesting about them is what's not said, their backstory. And yeah, I am doing a little bit of a game theory here. This is not canon in any way, but it kind of makes sense. I think that these are some of the richer residents of Metro City. Absorbed with their own looks, whatever is affecting the city drove them to see only their imperfections. Heading to the place where they spent most of their time shopping for things that elevated their status and beauty, they took on the form of the perfect models they aspired to be, literally gluing the outer shell of the mannequins to their skin. And after doing a little more research, this theory actually makes a lot of sense, because when you smash off the shell, their skin is heavily burned, and there is glue out there that can give you 3rd-degree burns. So I think I might be onto something. Another cool detail that I didn't pick up on when I first played is that Ethan hallucinates at some points that he's being followed by actual mannequins. And he only does this because of the mannequin enemy type. He is so stressed out that he can barely tell what is a mannequin and what is pretending to be one. It's such a cool little subtle detail. But skipping ahead, we do some more walking around. We fight some people and get chased around by some mannequins before finding an office. In the office, we do some forensic work to find that the matchmaker was here, and with no other leads, we follow a blood trail out of the room that brings us to a familiar scene. One victim, one mannequin. But something is wrong. The matchmaker only hunts women. posing them with his male mannequins. The mannequins are always missing their right index finger and always have a scar on their face. However, this setup is different. The mannequin is female and in pristine condition, but the male is missing a right index finger and has a scar on his face. This man is the matchmaker, and someone has killed him in the exact same way he has killed his victims. But before we have time to do any more investigating, we're interrupted by the police storming the building. And heading out to the entrance, Rosa calls us to let us in on a breakthrough she's had. Pretty much back in the murderer's apartment, all the serial killer newspaper clippings were not only cases that Ethan worked on, but also cases that went cold. Now the only serial killers left active on that wall are the recently deceased matchmaker and another called the torturer. It's all becoming clear now. Our mystery man, the one we've been chasing all game, is a completely new serial killer. A serial killer that kills serial killers. This is Serial Killer X. Still pondering on the revelation, Ethan isn't given much time to think as the police start breaching the building. So escaping out the back way, we smash through a door and promptly smash our heads. Also, something I find kind of funny about this cutscene is that Ethan smashes his head and then in the next cutscene he just like acts like nothing happened.
Yeah.
You were going to call me back.
Sorry. So, the fingerprint in the metro station.
Anyway, so with the mystery starting to make a little more sense, Ethan calls Rosa to strategize. We now know that there is one guy responsible for not only the frame job on Ethan, but also about 10 serial killer cold cases. The good news is that we now know SKX is going after the torturer, meaning that we only now have to pull off the small miracle of finding a serial killer that the FBI has been hunting for months, while also being on the run ourselves. Luckily, Rosa thinks she can help, and the pair plan to meet at the old library to talk strategy. So setting off, we enter possibly the most action-heavy level of the game. See, before we came here, Rosa warned us that the Burnside district was really dangerous, and while it's not as notable, it's kind of easy to compare it to Auburn from Fear. Both are notable districts within our troubled cities, but while Auburn was known for being a ghost town, Burnside is known for their completely insane residents, which is saying something considering the fact that we're talking about Metro City here, you know, like Crackhead Central.
We're getting reports of violent outbreaks near your current location.
And in this level, that insanity is on full display when a riot breaks out with us in the middle of it. Now this level is only about 5 minutes long, but it gives me some breathing room to talk about something that is very prevalent in this game, with that being firearms.
This is my boomstick!
Now you all know me, unless this is your first time watching one of my videos. In that case, welcome to one of my videos. Something that's pretty common in my videos is that I don't really talk about guns unless they're not really that conventional. This is mostly because it's a gun. It goes bang and bad guy goes dead. For how many games there are out there and for how different many of them are from each other, shooters don't really vary that much when it comes down to the shooter part. So the point is, I don't really talk guns unless there's something new to say. I'm not like heavy weapons guy. I can't make gun specs sound interesting. But with Condemned, I'm going to change my tune a little bit and talk about the guns. This is because the gunplay in Condemned is something really unique, because you spend about 90% of the game just walking around with something you just ripped off the wall. So when a conventional weapon appears, it's pretty exciting while also feeling kind of alien. See, Condemned is first person, but it's not a first person shooter. Even when you get a gun, it's still not a first person shooter. It's still just what it is, a first person brawler with guns. This is apparent when you begin to realize that the game works with guns and not for guns. There is no aim down sights, there is no crosshair, and pressing R doesn't reload. It shows how many bullets you have left until you're back to blunt instruments. And while all these handicaps might sound pretty limiting, they are. But that's kind of the point. To break it down, in a brawler like Condemned, firearms are an I win button. Every bullet in your gun is essentially a free fight skipper. You could pick up a pipe and go toe to toe with this guy, or you could blow him away. And in a game that isn't populated by legions of enemies looking to kill you, instead just having a few at a time, a gun is a lot of power, and those gameplay handicaps actually accentuate that fact. But anyway, I have to stop myself because I could literally talk about how guns back up the story all day, and I haven't even talked about the guns yet. So the first gun we have to talk about is the 45 cal. It's a fine little pistol that works best when you aim for headshots, but that's kind of its drawback. Having 9 bullets per clip means that if you're only going for body shots, you're only going to get max 3 kills out of this thing, making its longevity a non-talking point. Pretty much if you get into a fight while you have one of these, then you're not going to leave it with any bullets left, landing it firmly in Immerse tier. Next up is the shotgun. This is one of my favorite guns in the game, mostly because it's good and it shows up quite a bit through the game, so it's never an unwelcome gun. It does great damage, but like most video game shotguns, it suffers from a deficiency in vitamin range, which would be a problem if it weren't so damn satisfying to let an enemy get close, fully knowing you're about to end his life subscription. Ethan Thomas approved tier. The submachine gun is a weapon I have a love-hate relationship with. It does the same damage as the 45 cal, has 20 bullets, but I don't know. I feel like I get even less mileage out of this thing than I do the pistol, which might just be some weird psychological anomaly on my part, but that psychological anomaly is telling me that I don't have many fond memories of this thing, so it goes in meh tier as well. The double barrel shotgun is shit and I don't like it. There's not much else to say about it. It's just like the shotgun. It does the same damage, but it only has 2 shells in it. I mean, when you have the normal shotty in the game, imagine how disappointing it is to pick up its less successful little brother. All you can really think about when you're carrying this thing around is how less limited you'd be if you had the better version of this gun. The double barrel is just weird because it's one of the only examples of a direct downgrade in the game. The pistol and the submachine gun has pretty much the same stats, but the submachine gun has less accuracy. The shotty and this gun have the same stats, except this one has less bullets. Fuck you, double barrel. The rifle is a pretty great gun in all regards. It's got great damage, it's got great accuracy, it's got a high ammo count. I couldn't ask for a better gun. In fact, I literally couldn't ask for a better gun, or this gun in fact, because it's so good that it doesn't show up for about 95% of the game, and when it does, it's there for 5 minutes and then it's gone. So yeah, I like this gun, but it was gone too soon, so RIP Mr. Rifle. Finally, the revolver is my favorite gun out of the bunch. It's got almost the same damage as the shotgun, it's pretty accurate, and it shows up more than the rifle. It's just a great jack of all trades, and when you have this thing, you're in safe hands. Or is the gun in safe hands because it makes it safe? Are the hands in safe gun grip? So that's guns. Overall, the weapons in this game do a good job of having their own identity. There's not too many to the point that their identity gets muddled. In fact, the opposite happens. There's the perfect amount to allow for variety while maintaining identity. And this is coming from me, by the way, a chronic gun ignorer. I couldn't tell you shit about guns from my favorite games. So the fact that Condemned managed to make me notice them it's impressive. Anyway, so back in Burnside, like I said earlier, this is a short level, but I kind of love it. Earlier I mentioned that I liked how enemies weren't a part of a faction just hell-bent on killing you, and this level really displays that in such a chaotic and fun way. Most of the level just takes place in this arena where a bunch of enemies jump in to kill, let's see here. Anyone. Yeah, that's the whole fun of this level. You jump into the arena and then a bunch of guys jump in as well, and they just want to fight. It doesn't have to be you. It's not about you. It's just fight night. And that's about the whole level. We crack some heads and then the police show up and blow our eardrums out with their really, really loud speaker.
This is the Metro Police. Disperse immediately.
Monolith, I appreciate your dedication to sound production, but did you really have to make it that loud? So running away from the cops, we jump into a dumpster and start one of the goofiest sequences in the game. Like, you didn't ask for it, but here's Hobo Mario Kart. But getting to the finish line, Ethan has to hide from the cops a little more and finally makes it to the library. Now for me, this is that level. You know what I'm talking about. When you play a game, there's always that one level that just doesn't do it for you. That level you forget about, that level that drags on, and the library for me is that level. It's not that it's bad, it's just that for such a story-driven game, the plot seems to really slow down during this area, which is weird because in reality it doesn't. We get some pretty big plot points here, but I can't help but feel that the pace just goes snail mode here. But anyway, I won't complain anymore. I just don't have a whole lot to say about this area. What I do have to talk about is our meeting with Rosa. With all this weirdness that has gone on tonight, especially with the FBI, she has pulled Ethan's file and found that he might be more connected to this than he thought. And in this little sequence, I don't know why, but letting the player flip through the file themselves is a really effective way of conveying this building mystery. Through the pages, Rosa tells us that during his last medical checkup, it was noted that Ethan had insanely high muscle and bone density. This is why Ethan is built like a tank and can be thrown out a window while being completely fine. Apart from that, Ethan also has a hyperactive serotonergic system in his brain, which accounts for his kind of psychic link to the killers he hunts. Also, don't worry, I'm about to dive into that, but not before talking about the strangest part of Ethan's file, a blacked out chest x-ray covering his esophagus and larynx. The strangest part being that the file used to classify the results is from one of the highest levels in government. It's evident that there's something special about Ethan that the FBI is eager to keep tabs on.
Our government is awfully interested in you.
Picking up the new and improved taser, we head into this room and hey, what's this? A mouse pad? That logo looks familiar. Does anybody recognize that? It's Armacam. It's the Armacam logo from Fear.
What, we some kind of
shared universe.
Now, many of you weren't around when I made the video, but a little while ago I made a theory about System Shock and BioShock being in the same universe despite the two properties belonging to different companies, and I still stand by everything I said in that video, which means I'm 100% going to try and convince you that the two properties, Condemned and Fear, made by the same development studio and released in the same year, are in the same universe. I am going to convince you. So the first thing we need to establish here is that reused models don't mean anything. Fear and Condemned were made during the same time period, so it makes sense that the vending machines show up, the same Norton Mapes chips show up, the same mouse pads show up. It's efficient game design, but by using these assets in each game, they actually align the properties with each other stylistically, which is the first step towards plausibly saying that they're in the same universe. By the way, to anyone who hasn't played Fear or watched my Fear videos, I recommend go do that now, or skip this next bit if you care, because I'm going into full Fear spoilers.
Look, we're running out of time.
So the first indicator we have for these games coexisting is actually Ethan's psychic ability. I haven't discussed it much, but in this game, Ethan gets these visions of the future or past, which usually come to pass. Fear is a series that, despite appearances, is all about psychics. Alma Wade was such a powerful one that her consciousness could continue on even after her physical body died. Paxton Fettel also has a psychic ability and gets visions just like Ethan, seeing the fallout of the Origin facility explosion a whole day before it actually happened.
A war is coming. I've seen it in my dreams. Fire sweeping over the earth, bodies in the streets, cities turned to dust.
Even Point Man, who has a much lower psychic ability, gets visions of events that he wasn't present for, like Fettel interrogating Bill Moody in the water treatment plant. Beckett gets this too, seeing Alma getting dragged to the vault 2 decades earlier. My point is that in the Fear universe, it's established that everyone has a kind of psychic potential, but some are more sensitive than others. The people who are sensitive can witness events that have already happened or are going to happen, just like Ethan Thomas. But that's not the smoking gun I've got for this theory. The smoking gun is the through line. What defines these visions? Well, the answer is emotion. In the Fear series, Harlan only realized that Alma was a psychic when she began reacting strongly to his emotions. When he got angry, it would nearly paralyze her in fear. It's also not a big secret that the main thing that fuels Alma's powers is hate and rage towards those who wronged her. High levels of emotions seemingly create these fields in reality that psychics can absorb. That's why Beckett can still witness Alma being taken away nearly 2 decades on. That fear was so strong, it left a mark on reality. That's also why Ethan can witness a serial killer setting up his crime scene. The emotion and conviction inside the killers he hunts is almost like a scent that Ethan can follow. But what really ties this all together? Well, it's Ethan's hyperactive serotonergic brain system. In Condemned, it's implied that this is what gives Ethan these visions, plugging that into the emotion-based psychic system from Fear, and it actually works, because what does the serotonergic system do? It helps regulate emotions. Is it possible that a hyperactive version of this system could not only pick up strong lingering emotions of others, but also interpret them? Well, maybe. Both forms of psychic ability do work in pretty similar ways, and both of them are kept pretty vague, because trying to explain brain Wi-Fi in your game about shooting ghosts or beating up homeless people isn't really top priority, you know? But there's also stuff that links these worlds less in a lore sense and more in a logic sense than anything else. In the Condemned universe, we play as an FBI agent who just happens to have a psychic ability. There's obviously some weird stuff going on in this world. Meanwhile, in the Fear universe, there's enough of a paranormal presence for the Fear organization to be formed all the way back in 2002. Also, for those who don't know, Fear is a military arm that's dedicated to fighting paranormal entities. It's really cool. You should go watch my YouTube videos on them. And this is where the dates line up. There was enough weird stuff going on in the early 2000s to get an entire military branch established to combat it. Hell, in the 1980s, Armacam was fully ready to just jump on the I Believe Psychics Exist bus when Alma was just exhibiting strange behavior. In the world of Fear, paranormal stuff isn't common knowledge, but it is a thing that exists that would make Condemned fit pretty comfortably into the world. Fear also takes place in 2025, Condemned takes place in 2005. Both can have their own stories without either ever having to acknowledge the other, just like BioShock and System Shock. But with these games being in each other's universes, it just subtly supports the world building of the other, and it works really well. Not to get into spoilers of the next game, but with what happens with this whole conspiracy and how far it goes, it wouldn't be a stretch to see why people are more comfortable letting mega corporations like Armacam pretty much do the job of the government in the future. Like in the Fear games, Armacam owns Fairport. It's almost a company-run city. But yeah, that's my little theory on the two game series. I think it really does work, and I'm glad it's not some like huge overt thing. Sometimes to have that connection, you just need to have an Armacam logo on a mouse pad, and the player looks at it and goes, oh yeah, that's cool, and it makes sense. Also, I'm sorry I derailed the video so hard. I know we're meant to be talking about Streets of Rage Homeless Edition, but I just had to get that out of my system. In fact, it's still not out of my system because Condemned 2 only strengthens my theory. So, to distract myself, let's talk about how unbelievably broken the new Taser is. And no, I'm not talking about the normal Taser, because Rosa brings us an upgraded one during this level. Like, there was an actual need to upgrade this thing. This is the Super Taser. That is its real name, and it does live up to it. Previously, you would stun a guy for a few seconds, and that was that. The Taser was a little cheap feeling, but it wasn't like it took all the challenge out of a fight. You still had to close the distance before your target locked it in again. The Super Taser deletes this small bit of nuance, however, and says, my dad said I could be anything when I grow up, so I'm going to become a real gun. It will one-hit kill smaller enemies. It literally puts bigger enemies on the ground, and if an enemy is on low, it will outright kill them. And look, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not some video game elitist. If something is unfair in the game and I'm allowed to use it, I'm gonna use it, man. But this thing is so overpowered. I feel so dirty when I use it. It's so unfair. Now, where are we? Yeah, the library. Like I said before, this one is not my favorite level, and it's mostly because there's more gameplay going on here than story, which is the main thing I like about Condemned. So we're just gonna zoom through this level with the greatest hits. Overall, our goal is to find a working computer so that we can look up the torturer on the internet. I'm not kidding. Our big objective is to do a Google search. Pretty early on, we find a computer, but the server room is down, and Rosa pulls an evil within on us and just disappears.
To find the server room and get the network back.
What is going on here?
Going to look for her, it turns out that SKX is here and has snatched her up. So searching around the library, we fight a fuck ton of guys and track down Rosa to another computer terminal where it seems that SKX has left her. Talking to Rosa, we find out that all he really wanted was info on the torturer, and running a search, we find that there have been some recent developments in the case.
A retired gym teacher from the city's juvenile rehabilitation program has informed police of contact he had almost 8 years ago with a troubled youth named Carl Anderson, who reported fantasies that matched the torturer's methods exactly.
A school gym teacher has informed police that the torturer's MO is very similar to the fantasies of a student that once confided in him. Unfortunately, the teacher has gone missing. So trying to work the lead, we head down to the basement to find the school records to find out where the teacher worked. In getting the info, Rosa reads it out loud, unwittingly tipping off serial killer X on where to look.
There's a lot of Carl Andersons, but I bet this is our guy. He was enrolled or sentenced to an educational rehabilitation center for the severely troubled. St. Joseph's Secondary on Northeast 52nd and Fremont. It's been closed for 5 years, and no wonder. That's one of the worst parts of town. It's him. He's been listening to us.
We then fight our way through some more bad guys in pursuit, and the level ends with Rosa saying that she'll drive us to the school. And yeah, that's just the whole level. It's really just a lot of walking around and either Ethan or Rosa saying something like, "Damn, this computer doesn't work, we have to find another one." And I think it just slows down the game. We're not finding out any information naturally like we did earlier, it's just going around to different computers that hold all the answers we're looking for. The good news is that for me, the game really makes up for the lackluster level in the next one, because it brings back that Condemned vibe in spades. And that's all thanks to the killer we're hunting named Carl Anderson, aka the Torturer. Now, the Torturer is one of the gnarliest, darkest characters in this game, and it's fitting that they left this killer to be the last one, because he leaves one hell of an impact. The way the Torturer does things is both physical and mental. In stage 1, he kidnaps and tortures his victims, often removing body parts. In stage 2, he lets his victims go free into an area that he knows doesn't have any real exits and begins stalking them. Stage 3 is the easiest. The mental anguish becomes too much for his victims and they take their own life. Yeah, the Torturer is one of the most evil killers in the game, and I think it's deliberate that they put him in the spotlight just as SKX starts to become less of a mystery and more of a solid concept. It starts becoming a moral thing. At the start of the game, we can see that there's only a growing number of killers within Metro City, and the FBI is stumped on what to do about it. But Serial Killer X, he is doing something. He's actively hunting these people. So entering the school level with all the information on the torture in mind, all the player can really think is, are we really only here to try apprehend SKX? Also, for anyone that thinks that a serial killer that kills serial killers sounds kind of familiar, it's because it's Dexter. The original Dexter book actually came out before Condemned Criminal Origins, but this game came out before the TV show. So it's kind of a weird coincidence that SKX has the MO of Dexter, and he kind of looks like the TV show version of Dexter, but the TV show version wasn't even out yet. Anyway, no connection. It's probably just a big coincidence.
Maybe if I don't blink, my eyes will tear up.
Arriving at the school, Van Horn shows up like a discount G-man.
Thomas, it's Malcolm. How are you doing? Is the investigation going well?
It's going as well as it can be. Wait, what are you doing here? How did you know where to find me?
Oh, just a coincidence. Saw you from across the street.
Guys, it's P4 Brandos. How are you doing? Are you enjoying the video? Maybe you should like and subscribe. Once inside the school, the tone begins to turn in the story. Before, the horror came from being alone in these abandoned buildings, surrounded by people who just love to hurt you. But here, things begin to shift in a paranormal direction. Light bulbs bursting when you enter rooms, furniture being dragged down a hallway, with that same furniture being back where it was just a second later. The best part is that with how deep this mystery goes, we genuinely can't tell anymore if this is something paranormal or if Ethan is just losing it. Entering a room up ahead, we meet some new enemies as well as the level's reoccurring villain called the Butcher.
I'll prepare this now!
But with her running away, I'll start talking about the other new enemy named the Crawler. Now these guys were introduced a couple levels back, but I'm only talking about them now because of the visual turn they take in the school. Back in the library, they were on the edge of not looking human, but here, their eyes are completely white. They have no hair anywhere. They're wrapped in cables and covered in blood. It's around this point in the game that things really start to shift. Before, many of the enemies could be explained away by saying there's rampant drug use going on in Metro City, but by the time you get to the school, enemies are starting to look worse than even the most dire cases of drug addiction. They start to lose a bit of humanity, acting, moving, and looking like some sort of animal. These horrifying new developments aren't helped by what comes next either. Walking into a classroom, we can find a pair of human lips, and running forensics on them, they belong to our missing school teacher, Samuel Tibbets. And this part lets me go back to what I was talking about earlier with saving the torturer for last in the story. It's effective that we know how he operates, and while we may have entered this school in the hopes of saving Samuel Tibbets, after this room, those expectations are dialed back to hoping there's anything left by the time we find him. Without doing a whole lot of anything, the game has created this ticking clock feeling. Moving on, we run into the butcher again for the second and final time. Yeah, we're both on the same page if you thought that the butcher was going to show up, you know, more, but you know, Monolith, if you want to make a whole model for this character and voice act them just for them to show up twice, you can do that, I guess. But after this, we head into the gym finding a human arm. It belongs to Tibbets. We're running out of time. So redoubling our pace, we head outside and holy shit, okay, I have to talk about the atmosphere again. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that for every game I make a video on, I have a moment. There's a single moment I reach in the game, whether it's good or bad, that makes me think, yeah, I need to make a video on this thing. And this alleyway right here in Condemned was my moment. This is the moment it clicks for me, the moment all of Condemned clicks for me. At the start of the game, we know Metro City is in dire straits. We know it's only getting worse by the day, but we're on the outside looking in. Once Condemned really starts, we're hunted by our own organization. We begin to realize that the game isn't some thriller murder mystery. It's a tour of the world as it is. It's a walk on the other side of the looking glass. With all the police excitement, the flashing lights, the sense of justice, and having an active hand in cleaning up the mess that is this city, somehow Ethan and the player get sucked into an almost cozy shelter that is the FBI. But here in this courtyard, this is what the world looks like in those quiet places that the almighty eye of law enforcement isn't watching. And what we can see is a world that is slowly rotting away. That's what I see in Condemned. This world they've built is amazing in a way that many other games don't hold a candle to. It's rare that that world has me more enthralled than the actual story. But getting back on track, Ethan hallucinates this weird Hellraiser cosplayer killing him, and heading back inside the school, we get a vision of Samuel Tibbets running and hiding in a locker. So walking around a bit, we begin following a blood trail that leads to a bank of lockers, and opening one, missing an arm and lips, we've found Tibbets. Just unfortunately a little bit too late.
Help me!
Tibbets is still alive and tells us that Carl Anderson was taken away by a man, and 100 points to whoever guessed it was serial killer X, because that motherfucker was here. Also, I just want to point out how satisfying this psychic vision we get of the attack is. Through this whole school, our imagination has run wild at the concept of the torturer, to the point that the tension is nearly unbearable. And now I know we're not meant to root for SKX, but holy shit man, you're doing God's work. Those head bashes sound like they hurt. Anyway, Tibbets dies in the most tension-breaking ragdoll ever.
Rosa, send an EMT immediately.
And Rosa calls us to say she's traced some chemicals found in the DNA of an SKX fingerprint we found earlier. Apparently, the chemicals were created by a company called Applewell, and it's honestly this exact moment that I realized that Ethan is not the best detective.
This particular formulation includes some other trace chemicals and can be matched to a brand name called Applewell. I've put in a contact to the company to see if we can get a purchaser's list.
Applewell. apples.
Applewell. Apples. So after the call, we begin making our way out of the school, which sounds like an easy task, but unfortunately Ethan starts tweaking again, forcing us to fight a ton of enemies in a pool area and also get thrown around by a ghost. I'm not kidding. Also, as someone who's pretty well versed in the condemned lore, without giving anything away, I can say in 100% confidence that I have no idea if this is real or not. Like, Ethan tweaks a lot in this game, but his hallucinations have never physically affected him, and I'm pretty sure that all real threats in this game aren't paranormal / aren't capable of doing a paranormal activity to someone. Also, this is kind of a fascinating look into how game series are constructed / planned out, because, spoiler alert, Ethan's psychic ability is not in the second game. So a lot of these concepts that show up, like Mr. Ghost Man, they never really get explained, and with the lore that we find out later, they double don't get explained. Whatever's going on here, it's clear that Monolith had the big details set up, but they didn't have all those little bits and pieces for the full payoff yet. Anyway, after walking off our ghost attack, Rosa calls us up to let us know that she's narrowed down the Applewell lead to a place called Appleseed Orchard in the countryside. So meeting with Malcolm again, it turns out he's all too happy to take us there. On the way there, the pair talk about what's going on, and it's your usual Van Horn vagueness fest until Ethan mentions that he's seen his own file.
I saw my file. Apparently I'm some sort of circus freak to them.
That may not be helpful. I wonder how much they know of what is happening. I would stay away from the Bureau as long as I could.
It's not like I have much choice, since they still think I killed those 2 officers.
Their deaths were unfortunate, but maybe it's best this way.
Best? You seem to know a lot more about what's happening than you're letting on.
This is Appleseed Orchard Estate.
Arriving at Appleseed Orchard, Van Horn sends us to the main house. Once inside, the level is pretty simple. We have to follow writing on the walls with our UV light, scan a clue at the end of it, and repeat. Doing that 4 times gives us a riddle phrase which reveals a mirror in the basement is actually a door. And heading inside, we can find serial killer X's main hideout. And oh boy, it's like a 2010 teenage girl's room, except instead of Justin Bieber posters hanging up everywhere, it's photos of Special Agent Ethan Thomas. On a nearby table, we can find files detailing Ethan's career. It's becoming clearer that Ethan's relationship to this killer isn't just wrong place, wrong time. There's a deeper connection that we're not seeing.
There's a few newspaper stories about your investigations. It's even got internal Bureau newsletter articles on your career progress, promotions, postings, things like that. The last few pages are newspaper clippings about serial killers not being found. Some of these are circled in red, with a big exclamation point beside them.
But hot on the heels of the reveal, suddenly there's a noise upstairs, and heading up to investigate, we find one Carl Anderson, aka the Torturer, dead by his own hand. We then call up Rosa to confirm his identity when our boss cuts the connection.
Farrell, listen to me. Talk to Rosa. We're this close to getting the guy.
I don't know what poor innocent schmuck you're chasing, but stop it now. Come into the Bureau, give yourself up, and we'll talk. There are things we need to discuss.
I can't do it, Farrell.
Then play it your way, but we'll find you. Count on it.
Okay, so when I said the writing in Condemned is weird, this is what I mean, because in a more meta sense, the writers are trying to convey their story. They're trying to build tension, continue the story, keep the plot rolling. But the way they do this is they make their characters say pretty much anything but what a real person would say in a conversation like this. For example, Ethan should probably say, "Wait, I'm suspended? I thought I was wanted for murder. This old guy, Malcolm Van Horn, said you guys already decided decided I was guilty. This one is really special as well. First, Farrell says that he doesn't believe anything Ethan is doing holds any legitimacy, and then says to come into the bureau like he's being called into work. He then says, give yourself up like he's gonna be arrested. He then says they'll talk, which doesn't really make any sense considering he just referenced that he's wanted for murder. Farrell then doubles down and says there are some things we need to discuss. And at this point, the veil might as well be dropped because it's obvious that Farrell does not believe that Ethan committed those murders. So why does he not believe that he's chasing the right guy right now? Ethan then says he can't do it instead of explaining that he has located the matchmaker and the torturer, because both of those facts would probably change Farrell's tune. Farrell in response says that Ethan can do whatever he wants, but the FBI will find him. And this sentence just really puts a bow on it for me because Farrell is practically begging Ethan to come in. He barely talked about how Ethan may or may not have killed 2 cops, and he also references that there will be almost no consequences if he were to come in. Like, this isn't a huge spoiler or anything, but it is pretty obvious that things are a little shady over at the FBI, but the writers just don't know how to communicate that properly. They want to maintain that front that Ethan is wanted for murder because that's the only way this whole campaign happens, but they also want to hint that something is not right with the Bureau. You can't have your cake and eat it too in the way that you're writing this thing. So with the torturer dead, the man he was running from shows up, Serial Killer X. And as any normal person would do, Ethan decides to put on Carl's clothes to pretend to be him and ambush SKX.
Ah, Carl. You've given up.
Wait for it.
It's a shame.
Wait for it.
Well, perhaps you know what you have put others through. Although it makes you even more pathetic that you weren't brave enough to kill yourself. Now I'll have to do the job and make it look right. So sad.
Now!
You shouldn't have come here.
This is it. This is the final showdown. And as far as boss fights go, the Serial Killer X boss fight is kind of, shit. It's one of the only ones in the game, including the Butcher, but all SKX does is literally cut laps of the house. He just runs around, runs away from Ethan. It's a weird fight. I don't even really know a strategy to beat him. SKX is a mix of beefy and quick, so he can tank some serious damage, but he can also just outrun you before you get to inflict said damage. The guy's also a massive opportunist. If you turn your back, he'll show up, and if you fight back, he'll fuck off. It's just this random behavior that turns a boss fight that should be a huge showdown into this not particularly fun game of cat and mouse. But hey, maybe I'm an idiot and it's all just a big metaphor for the game that Ethan and SKX have been playing all this time, or SKX always one step ahead of Ethan. But powering through the fight, we beat the shit out of SKX for a bit until Malcolm Van Horn has revealed his true intentions. Fading in and out of consciousness, we watch as he tries to convince SKX, aka Leland Van Horn, his nephew, to let him help. Without a word, Leland strangles Malcolm and the level ends. Waking up in the barn, everything is revealed. Well, not everything. In the grand scheme of things, very little is revealed, but a small puzzle piece that is the entire plot of this game is revealed.
We were good in the beginning. But you turned out to be kind of a failure, didn't you? You still don't get it? I've been using you, Ethan Thomas. I watched you, and followed you, and used you to find the serial killers you so desperately sought, and then killed them.
This is the big reveal. Everything that's happened isn't connected to Ethan, it's happened because of Ethan. For years, like a parasite, SKX has latched onto Ethan's career, watching him, observing him, following him, only stepping in to deal with the killers himself whenever Ethan got close. And he remained undetected through all this by simply killing every target with their own methods. And it was all ruined by nicotine addiction. Leland Van Horn was a professional and successful serial killer, until his addiction got the best of him.
I can smell the cigarette smoke. He's right above us.
Don't be like Van Horn. Don't let addiction ruin your professional life. But back in the barn, as Leland starts monologuing about what a great serial killer he is.
Killed them the same way they'd killed their own victims. A bit of fun, you know? I got good at it.
He starts monologuing.
We suddenly notice a strange-looking creature appear behind him. Leland then cuts off Ethan's finger, Ethan rips through a solid chain, holy shit, and Malcolm tells us to go after the creature, saying it's the one that's responsible for everything. So heading out, we enter the Appleseed Orchard grounds, and this is where the game goes insane. Before we could justify everything that was happening with stuff we knew. This is just a serial killer case, these are just junkies trying to kill us, my boss is just incredibly stupid. But as everything has moved forwards, our excuses have started wearing thin. The FBI is now looking shady. Malcolm Van Horn is XKX's uncle, and now that we've escaped the barn, we're up against some of the most deformed enemies we've seen yet. It's just another example of the Condemned vibe. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, you're thrown back in the deep end. And this deep end is a whole new depth, because walking through this area, you don't have your taser, you don't have your flashlight. It's a disorientation that thematically matches this point in the story perfectly.
Man, we're lost.
But with that being said, there's actually not a whole lot to talk about in this area. It's just a lot of fighting until we reach a building. And heading inside, we find the creature Malcolm talked about has set up a little arena where we have to fight a bunch more enemies. After defeating the waves, the creature jumps down, and hurting it enough, we can rip off a piece of metal that has grafted to its skin. With the creature jumping through the ceiling, we follow, entering the final boss fight. Now this thing is called the Oro Dark Primary, and if you're wondering what its relation to the lore is, it doesn't have one. Yeah, the game just drops this Hellraiser looking dude on you as the final boss fight with zero explanation, but don't worry, I will explain it in time, because first we have to beat him. And oh boy, this guy is one tough customer for a few reasons. For one, this is the only enemy in the game to use any sort of fighting style other than drunken brawl. Two, this is one of the only fights in the game where you actually have to worry about what weapon you take into it. It is all about blocking here, you better believe that. And that is only because of reason 3. The Oro Primary uses a fighting style that I think is Kali, sorry if I said that wrong, but it was mocapped by a guy named Jordan Palin, and in this old ass demo tape I found, you can see that he really knew what he was doing with these moves. The problem is that the devs smoothed out the final animations to the point that which movements you need to block and what is just maneuvering to another attack stance becomes extremely muddled, and you can't tell what's actually going to hurt you and what isn't. That's why you need a quick block rate weapon for this fight, because when I played this on stream, watch B5 Brandos for the highlights by the way, I went in there with an axe and paid dearly for it. You're doing too much, man. What? I gotta watch and wait. I was not watching or waiting. Fuck, man. He gets in your face so much! Holy crap. Ah! Don't let him know your next move. What was that? What was that? But yeah, grabbing a 2x4 is how you win in this situation. Because man, this thing lets you bully that hobo ninja. After doing that for a few minutes, we finally put him down so hard that he falls through 2 floors. In the next cutscene, Ethan runs back to the barn to save Van Horn, but arrives too late. The barn is engulfed in flames, and we then get the world's weirdest fake out. Like, just watch this. They build up what's about to happen, only to completely throw it away and not mention it again.
What?
Van Horn, why did you wait until Ethan was in view to turn your car lights on? Why didn't you say anything when you turned your car lights on? Ethan, why are you putting your hands up when a random light comes on despite no police officers yelling at you once those lights came on? FBI, why can't you find a guy when there's someone you employ who literally knows where Ethan is?
You actually this stupid.
Later, Ethan and Van Horn are leaving the estate. Talking with each other, Van Horn continues to be cagey about what just happened.
Thomas, you have looked into the face of hate. the visage of evil. Know that hate is in your soul, too. It is, sadly, everywhere. Mastering one's fear and controlling one's hatred is perhaps the most difficult thing one can do.
But before Ethan can press further, he hears a noise in the back, and stopping, we find that Van Horn has rescued SKX. But Ethan isn't very happy with this and starts positively tweaking.
I don't care whether the sick fuck is in his right mind or not.
Think of what you are doing! Both of you have a chance for redemption.
Redemption? Listen, old man, you used me just like he did. You used me to save your precious nephew, a serial killer. You're no better than he is.
Now it's decision time. We, the player, get 5 seconds to decide what we want to do. This is a moral decision. Was SKX really in control of his actions? Does he deserve to be punished for punishing those who have hurt others? What will we do? It doesn't matter. Yeah, this is one of those games where no matter what you do, the ending doesn't change. Your actions don't do anything, especially when it comes in regards to the sequel. If you shoot Leland, you shoot him. And if you don't shoot him, he pulls out a pistol and cancels his own life subscription. Also, I find it weird that if you do shoot Leland, Malcolm apparently just does nothing. Like, why were you pointing the pistol at Ethan for, dude? Our next cutscene takes place sometime later. Ethan has been cleared of the murder charges, but is still maintaining a low profile. Rosa shows up in the cafe he's in and presses him for info on what really happened during the SKX case, but writing down she's wearing a wire, Ethan decides to not say anything. Rosa then leaves and Ethan heads to the bathroom with one last mystery rearing its head, and that mystery is... what just happened? Yeah, that was Condemned Criminal Origins, a game all about uncovering a big mystery where you don't uncover the big mystery. But now that we have finished the main campaign, I can tell you all about the lore. The lore is pretty bare bones in this game, deliberately. You're not solving any massive conspiracies by scrapping in alleyways, and it shows. Ethan only just manages to put together all the pieces of the SKX case and get out alive. So with this cult coming out of nowhere, there's no way that Ethan could really get any real answers on who they are, and so neither does the player, and I kinda like it that way. The only issue is I can't really give you guys a timeline of lore events because there are story mechanics at play that we have no information about, which is the thing that's actually making the plot tick on. So instead today, we're actually going to be doing something a little more mood appropriate. We're talking about what we know and we're slapping it on an evidence board.
You still don't get it? I've been using you, Ethan Thomas. I watched you, and followed you, and used you to find the serial killers you so desperately sought, and then killed them.
From the game, there are 5 major plot points we need to consider when trying to unravel the story. Ethan Thomas, Serial Killer X, Malcolm Van Horn, Metro City, and most of all, the cult. But to start, we need to discuss the center of all these elements, Metro City. In the game, Metro City is in a state of urban decay, bordering on poverty. And between levels, we can learn that this is actually a fairly new thing by reading reports from several different agencies during the loading screens. Overall, the general gist is that in the recent months or years, I don't know, violent crime in Metro City has shot up in small pockets of the city, notably the Burnside area and downtown. In an unlockable surveillance report from an undercover cop, we can learn that the police have begun pulling out of those areas to avoid direct conflict with the residents. The undercover cop that writes the reports is codenamed Harp, and he observes the influenced over time, watching as they grow more and more insane, and through the next couple text logs slowly starts to lose it. At an unknown point in time, Harp is killed and his body is recovered with his pockets being filled with over 60 bird skulls. And if you're thinking the birds are a strange detail, you're completely right. Dead birds are a collectible through the game for Ethan, and for good reason. In another report from sociologist Dr. Feldman, he reveals that there has been a huge increase in bird deaths around the areas affected by the latest crime wave. According to another report, these birds are dying due to their brains suddenly dissolving. Moving away from the birds, we can read other reports that clue us into the state of the city in other areas. Confidential reports indicate that there has been a 64% increase in police officer crime, as well as a 114% increase in police family domestic violence. An interesting correlation is that the police officers involved in these crimes are the ones who have frequently been responding to crime wave affected areas. By the way, a little cool detail is that this report actually explains a little moment in the game. In the Burnside area, the second the police show up, they try to shoot you. And the reason they do this is because these are the cops that are referenced in these reports. Their constant exposure to these high crime areas has affected them in the same way it's affected the residents. It's made them more violent and more ready to resort to extreme measures. It's just such a really cool thing, because in the game you're like, oh, the police are trying to shoot me, oh damn, but it's actually a part of a bigger in-universe problem. Finally, on the reports front, we can learn the biggest development in Metro City's recent history, which is the passing of law enforcement to outside agencies. It's said that at some point crime got so bad in the city that the governor handed over the keys to law enforcement to some unnamed agencies, although it's safe to say that the FBI was close to front and center. It's also important to note that the history of Metro City before the events of the game isn't really nailed down with dates. While we do have all these reports coming out of nowhere, we don't actually know the timeline. So personally, I'm going to assume that the birds and the small increase in crime came first before the escalation into FBI territory, but the FBI has to happen quite a bit of time before the events of the game, since Ethan needs in-universe time to investigate at least a dozen killers as well as Leland killing said killers. So I'll say that the escalation of violence took place over about a year and a half before the FBI stepped in, setting the start of Metro's problems midway through 2001 and escalating into 2003. After the FBI came to town, they attempted to combat the growing crime wave over 1 to 2 years, making this time period 2003 to 2005 ish. But now we've established the timeline, we need to jump back into 2003 when the FBI jumps into Metro's affairs. Around this time, Ethan is the poster boy for the Bureau, or so it seems. However, the FBI is actually keeping him in Metro City due to his connection to the crime wave and the cult. Around this time, Leland Van Horn, like many others, begins being affected by Metro City's darkness. But while others have given in to their dark desires and become serial killers, Leland seemingly has a good conscience within him that is twisted by this dark presence coming out of the city. A presence that begins telling him to rid the world of its monsters, and Leland begins his campaign against the growing number of serial killers within the city. However, being smart, Van Horn decides to get someone else to do the heavy lifting and sets his sights on the FBI's star investigator, Ethan Thomas. Through the years, Leland would watch Ethan's every move, tracking his investigations until he had enough to go on and snatching Ethan's arrest before he could get there. Leland would also kill these killers with their own methods, leaving the police thinking that the killer was just another victim. Over with Malcolm Van Horn, this is where things get a little bit murky, while also making things a little clearer with his through line between Ethan and Leland and the cult. See, Malcolm knew Ethan's father, Malcolm knows about the cult, and Malcolm is also related to SKX. He's the key to understanding all this, and yet we don't ever get any of the answers we want. It's kind of what makes Malcolm more interesting in retrospective, because for all of his weird acting and vagueness, he doesn't ever tell the truth straight, which is strange considering that he needs Ethan, and this is something that kind of makes the mystery deeper while also making it a little more shallow because of how inaccessible the whole thing is. But all this means nothing without our true through line, the cult. Now in this game, the cult is unseen for a majority of the experience, but their presence is felt to an almost smothering level. Everywhere you look in this game, you can feel them. The raving mobs in the streets are their work. The abandoned buildings that once housed businesses and apartments are their work. An invisible force is choking the life out of this city, and we still know nothing about them. But that question still remains. The why. Why is this happening? Why is Ethan special? Why is Metro like this? Why? Well, the answer is kind of wonderful in my opinion. There is no answer to this mystery because we haven't been investigating this mystery. The whole game we've simply been following a serial killer, blind to the world around us, and when we finally have a moment to stop and think, we find that that killer has led us to the source of the decay, the source of the rot, the violence, the bloodshed. It all stems from the cult, and we've simply been too blind to see what's really happening here. That's why I kind of like Condemned as a solo package. By itself, it's almost a story about the dangers of obsession. Ethan is an obsessive person, constantly burying himself in his work to the point that he can't even see the answer to all of his cold cases lay in the apartment right across from his. Through the game, he obsesses over a single lead, ignoring the constant signs that there's more to this than it seems. And when he finally comes face to face with an answer to a question he hadn't been asking, it's gone. And there's nothing he can do about it. By the end of the game, Ethan's obsession has left him with nothing, and the opportunity to truly change things has been missed. By the end of the game, Ethan has a new obsession, but it's one he knows he will never have the opportunity to rid himself of, because it's all he has left. Or at least that's my interpretation if the game was a one and done. Without the sequel, Condemned would have been a very cool meta story about obsession, and while our poor protagonist Ethan would have been left in a pretty bad spot, it would have probably hit harder than what they ended up doing. Now, I know what you're thinking, what kind of lore explanation was that? Well, it's my lore explanation. See, when I decided to make a video on this game, I played both this and its sequel on stream, and after finishing the first game, that lore explanation was the one that made sense, and strangely enough, it was the most satisfying. Yeah, the lore where the larger mystery is still shrouded in darkness is the most interesting to me because it works so damn well with the rest of the game. Every level you plunge deeper and deeper into the rotting depths of Metro City, as well as deeper into the mystery of the plot. There's never a moment where you feel you've got the full picture nailed down because there's always another level slightly revealed to you. Even during the cutscene where Leland explains his career as a serial killer, you can't spend too much going, yeah, that makes sense, because out of nowhere, this thing shows up. Now I'll take a step back. There is a real lore explanation for everything that happens in the game. By completing achievements, you can unlock agency reports which details the investigation of the cult mentioned by Rosa at the end of the game. But I'm not going to tell you about it, because it actually ruins a lot of stuff in this game for me. It outright explains many of the things that were kept vague. It dives into the inner workings of the cult that we only met in the last level, and it also explains what exactly is happening to Metro City, as well as how it's happening. Literally down to the mechanics of what is happening to Metro City, you find out the absolute nitty-gritty details. I'm surprised they didn't include the actual transcripts of the cult's official plan. And while it does this, it omits the actual interesting stuff that the sequel does try to flesh out. It's like reading a Sherlock Holmes novel, and then the afterword from the author is just them explaining every little detail of the plot just so the reader understands. Really, the biggest strength of Condemned is its ambiguity, as we'll learn when we cover this thing.
That's me, Ethan Thomas. Drunk, and drunk. Why? Because this damn city's too fucking drunk to see what's killing them.
Its mystery feels almost like it's best unsolved. Like if the answer to it all were behind a curtain, it might be best not to look. And there aren't many stories, games, or movies that can do that for me. I mean, you guys know me. I love lore. I love answers. And yet, this game is literally able to make me feel satisfied just by saying, hey buddy, just be glad you got out alive. In retrospect, Condemned is an underrated masterpiece, a shining example of that innovative spirit found in so many early 2000s games. To me, this game is damn near perfect. The story, the gameplay, the atmosphere, it all works in conjunction so well that there's not much else to say except this is what video games should be, an experience. It's almost sad that more people don't know about this game. Out of the 3 games Monolith released in 2005, Condemned got the short straw and was doomed to forever just be the game that sometimes comes up when talking about Fear or Monolith Productions. But there's also a part of me that's happy that there's a game like this out there that not many people know about, because Condemned is a masterpiece and probably 1% of Fortnite's player base even knows it exists. It strangely gives me hope. It makes me feel like all the good games aren't just on the front front page of Steam. A good game isn't good because it's flashy, has good graphics, or simply has legions of fans singing its praise. It's all about how that game makes you feel, and Condemned makes me feel good. I like this game. It is great, and it's out there. So if there's a few things to take away from this video, I'd say look into the past. Go play that game you've heard of. Go play that thing you've been meaning to play. Go jump into that thing that you haven't tried, that you haven't heard of. Through the history of video games, there have been hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of video games made, and littered through them are hidden gems just like Condemned. So go play them, go try them. Sure, not all of them will be that masterpiece you're wanting, but sometimes you might just run across something a little like Condemned. Oh yeah, and the game's a 9 out of 10 by the way. Once again, a huge thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video and taking a chance on me by being the channel's first ever sponsor. So don't forget to check out this awesome free-to-play game by using my link down in the comments or description to get your hands on that massive bonus pack that includes the exclusive Eagle of Valor vehicle decorator, 100,000 silver lions, 7 days of premium account, and much more. Once again, this offer is available for a limited time only, so get it while you can. Hello everybody, thank you for watching. This has been a work in progress, I will say. I'm sorry it took me this long to get this video out, but I was getting my life together. Pretty much over the last couple weeks, a lot of stuff has happened. I've transitioned out of a job that I was really not enjoying, and so you can probably watch all my old videos in retrospective, and anytime I seem like overly angry, that's not because I'm like an angry person, it's because like I was in a really shit job. But anyway, I was transitioning out of that, and I've settled into my new job now, and I've been also trying to like figure out how YouTube fits into this new life of mine, because I do want to still do YouTube a lot. So yeah, I've just been trying to engage that, and I finally kind of found that balance, so I'm back. Also, I was doing research for Condemned, and I found that Leland's methods are really similar to Dexter's, so I was like, oh, I want to do some research on Dexter by watching an episode. And then the first episode was really good, so I watched like the whole season, and then I just kept watching seasons until I got to season 5, and I was thinking, man, this show's shit. So yeah, I accidentally watched 5 seasons of Dexter, so that's why this video is so late. But thank you for sticking around, all my subscribers that have been sticking around for all this time. I probably won't take a hiatus that long, for at least a bit. I think I just got kind of burned out by the fear videos, and then also all that stuff with my job and everything like that. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video and you're not subscribed, please do that. Please subscribe, please like. I also have a little fan club. You can become an M4 member where you can see videos early, and you can also vote on video topics. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you when we can cover Condemned 2. I don't really want it, but I guess we'll do it. Okay, bye.